The question is that the amendments be agreed to, and I call the honourable member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. The stated intention of this bill is to make our ports and airports safer to the extent that it changes the approach to regulating the Maritime Security Identity Card and the Aviation Security Identity Card, the MSIC and ASIC respectively. It has to be said at the outset that it leaves many areas of safety and security regulation untouched, especially in relation to our seaports and other maritime infrastructure. There are also aspects of this bill that are not sufficiently clear, and there is a question mark over the potential for these changes to unfairly discriminate or otherwise prevent people from working in our ports or airports who present no genuine security risk. I can say from experience that there are many workers in my community that are directly affected by these changes to the extent that an MSIC is a prerequisite of their employment. At a time when employment conditions are difficult, and in Western Australia they are as bad as they have been in a quarter of a century, any change that affects a person's opportunity to work should be approached with great care. I've assisted people both in the past and more recently who have had their MSIC renewal denied and are then forced to seek clarification or apply for administrative discretion. Needless to say, that presents a situation of enormous stress. Taken altogether, it's not clear whether this bill really serves the entire purpose intended or does so in the most effective way, nor whether it strikes the right balance in making both administrative and security improvements, while first ensuring that affected workers are not subject to some new and potentially capricious obstacle to work. While this bill tinkers around the edges, we should keep in mind those areas of safety and security regulation that are not being made the focus of review and reform. It is disappointing that a number of serious matters of maritime security in particular continue to go unaddressed by this government, or in some cases are positively undermined by the actions of this government, and I'll come to that in due course. Last year there was a fairly rapid Senate inquiry into this bill as it existed in the 44th Parliament nearly a year ago. The report of the inquiry raised a number of issues in relation to the proposed law's purpose, scope and effect. As other members have pointed out in the debate already, there's a very basic but important inconsistency between the way the National ICE Task Force highlighted a need to focus on serious and organised crime, whereas this bill refers to serious or organised crime. Clearly they're not the same. The common practice for law enforcement agencies is to use the criteria serious and organised crime, and that's the formulation in the relevant Senate report and in the submission from the Attorney-General. It's hard to see why that formulation wouldn't prevail, and on that basis Labor, through the Shadow Minister, has indicated we'll move amendments to correct this. One of the reasons I'm very happy to take part in this debate is because I represent an electorate that has both a sea and air port. It's well known that Fremantle is WA's principal cargo port, through which passes virtually all of WA's container trade, as well as bulk commodities such as petroleum, grain, alumina, iron ore, mineral sands and so on through the outer harbour. In 2015-16, total port trade through Fremantle was 34.91 million mass tonnes, with a value of more than $26.1 billion. But perhaps less well known, Jandakot Airport, a regional airport in my electorate, has at various times been the busiest airport in terms of flight movements, not just in Australia, but I think in some years in the Southern Hemisphere. It's always been the case that sea and airports are points of entry and access when it comes to the illegal importation of goods, including the importation of illegal drugs. And proper regulation of these areas, their physical and systemic security measures, and oversight of all personnel with access to ports, airports and seaports are critical to maintaining safety and security. In that context, it has to be recognised that these changes to MSIC and ASIC arrangements leave some of the most significant security risk areas untouched. In the first place, there are already parts of the maritime supply chain that are not covered by the MSIC requirements. For example, those working in container packing yards or senior and middle managers in stevedoring or trucking companies. What's more and what's worse, this government has actually pursued and implemented policies that increase the risk in Australian ports and at offshore maritime facilities by weakening Australian coastal shipping and by encouraging the use of foreign crews and flag of convenience shipping. Deputy Speaker, the cynical use and expansion of the temporary licence provisions under the Navigation Act have inflicted significant damage on the viability of Australian-owned and flagged ships, and therefore on the employment opportunities for Australian seafarers.
Shame.
As we consider a bill that purports to strengthen the MSIC and ASIC screening arrangements, let's just remember that foreign crew holders of maritime crew visas are not subject to the same checks as apply to Australian workers that hold an MSIC.
Shame.
We've seen several examples in recent years of foreign flag vessels that operate in flagrant disregard for basic workplace standards, and this creates safety and security and environmental risks. It really doesn't matter how robust the MSIC arrangements are if an increasing number of ships and workers aren't covered by them, and if in future we face the prospect of having no ships and workers covered by them if there are no Australian flagged and crewed vessels. A strong coastal shipping industry is important to ensure the ongoing presence and capacity of Australian flagged vessels to serve our freight needs, to sustain maritime jobs and skills in this country, and to give Australia a sufficient merchant marine capacity. Shipping is our link to the world. We're an island nation. Our economic and strategic engagement depends on shipping. Our ports are the apertures through which our import and export lifeblood flows. And make no mistake, if the government continues to inflict a death by 1,000 cuts on Australian coastal shipping, the economic and strategic and environmental consequences will be substantial. Beyond our own compelling national interests, we shouldn't forget that Australian seafarers and port workers through the Maritime Union of Australia and the International Transport Workers Federation play an active role in fighting to secure fair and safe working conditions for people to go to sea or work in ports the world over. And that's in keeping with our national character. That's something that Australians have always done. We're not just concerned about our own circumstances, about safety and security in our own country, but more widely.
Yeah.
And that's been an incredibly honourable tradition and a great contribution by working men and women and their representatives, their organisational representatives in this country. Seafarers have always been and will continue to be a class of worker that is especially vulnerable. Last October, for the second time in 2 months, the Australian Maritime Safety